Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do. In this episode, I interview Quinten Steenhuis, Suffolk Law professor and DocAssemble expert, whose journey from legal aid attorney to legal tech innovator has revolutionized how technology can scale access to justice for those who need it most. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm Tom Martin, your host, and I'm thrilled today to have Quinten Steenhuis on. He is a practitioner in residence and co-founder and co-director of the Legal Innovation and Technology Lab at Suffolk Law School. And I'm very proud to also be a colleague of Quinten's, although he has much more experience and he's done some fascinating projects that we're going to get into later. But how are you doing over there, Quinten?
We're doing pretty well. Yeah, it's a beautiful spring day here in Boston. One of our first really nice ones. So
that's awesome. I really love this time of year here in Vancouver. You know, you had mentioned it was raining a little bit in Boston. Like, we get rain for almost 10 months a year. And so we all really look forward to the sun coming out. Like this morning, took some pictures of the flowers out front because, you know, sometimes you got to stop and smell the roses.
Yeah, we have some beautiful trees that are still in bloom in our neighborhood. Been enjoying looking at those quite a lot.
Before we, get into your backstory, what's something that you were just working on right now? I think there's a new project that just came out, right?
So this week we launched an eviction sealing app. So that was really excited about that for a couple of reasons. One, eviction sealing is something I really understand the impact of from my time working in legal aid. So I spent 12 years at Greater Boston Legal Services representing tenants. I often saw how much of a barrier it was for a tenant that their landlord could just look up that tenant's name, whether they won or lost, whether they sued the landlord or the landlord sued them. No matter how trivial the cause was, if they found their name in the online court record, they were often not going to get that apartment, which meant we couldn't help them move on from a bad situation to a better one. They were going unhoused. Their kids maybe were displaced from their school system. Really important to me to see that tenants don't have that barrier when it's unfair for them. The other really exciting thing about that project is it's one of our first collaborations with the trial court where we have electronic filing integrated in it. So this is something that we've been working on in one way or another for the last 7+ years before I even joined the Lit Lab. As a legal aid attorney, when the court was signing their contract with their vendor to deliver electronic filing, put in a public comment and said, hey, whatever system that we have to be able to let people integrate with and have a way to connect some of the great apps that we're building in legal aid to that electronic document. And this is really the culmination of all of that work, where we're really doing it in Massachusetts for the first time. We've been doing it in a few other states. Went live with some of that in Illinois first, and then we followed up by doing it trial in the appeals court here in Massachusetts. This is our first real collaboration with the trial court. So it's exciting milestone.
Yeah, that's really cool. And also, as the founder of Lemma Legal Consulting, that's the company where you provide like private consulting on these same like automation matters, right?
That's right. A lot of the projects are a bit different when we're doing them with my Lemma legal hat. So I do some work with nonprofits in that capacity. In Suffolk, mostly we're not doing projects that are focused on directly working with an end user. So we're more doing infrastructure work. We have this kind of special relationship with the appeals court and the trial court in Massachusetts that let us take that a little bit more broadly, where we actually build apps from start to finish for them. So as a consultant, I'm working with folks around the world, and a lot of them, about half of our clients maybe are in private law firms, half of them are in nonprofits. And that work ranges from efficiency work to help with intake process improvement, for example, using AI innovations, to kind of the standard document, whether that's for a family law firm, estate planning firm. Those are some of the most common and popular areas for that work, the document automation work.
And I know you've done a lot of document automation work in, especially with regard to DocAssemble and integrating that into people's workflows. And I definitely want to get into all of that. And for everyone watching, that's a bit of a teaser about what we'll get back to later. But as you all probably know, I do want to get into your origin story. So,
all right.
Yeah, let me ask you a few questions about that. So now you live in Cambridge, right?
That's right.
Were you born in Cambridge? Where did you grow up?
No, I grew up almost my whole life in Ithaca, New York. So upstate was the place where Cornell University is based, as well as Ithaca College. Beautiful, bucolic, small town. You mentioned the bad weather that you get in Vancouver, not getting to see the sun for months at a time. Definitely true of growing up in Ithaca as well. And then I went from there to Pittsburgh for my undergraduate, kind of the same. So it's bright and sunny here in Boston in comparison to that. That's my childhood.
Wow. Okay. So was it, so in Ithaca, like, describe the neighborhood a little bit for people that might not be as familiar with it.
So Ithaca's a pretty small city. So the city has about 30,000 people. Total college town. A lot of back to the land hippies moved to Ithaca and stayed there. And I think my family was somewhere in that realm as well. I was one of 9 kids, so I was adopted as one of 9 kids. My dad was a college professor. Yeah, big family.
You said your dad was a college professor?
Yes, he was in the agricultural and biological engineering school at Cornell.
And what kind of work? What kind of work did your mom do?
We had a big family. My mom worked for most of my childhood, at least part-time. She worked early on as a preschool teacher, and then moved into doing some family support kind of work, advocacy for families, people in foster care system and an adoption system, and nonprofits are part of my time growing up as well.
Wow. Okay, so I can see how, like, she's definitely had an influence on you in terms of, like, helping people, doing good in the world, and then your father with the academic pursuit, and then you ending up, as a professor. That's pretty cool. What would you say were some early influences from them that you got in your experience? Was there any, like, preference that they had for what you would study in school, or?
There really wasn't any pressure of that kind when I was growing up. I really had a lot of room to kind of chart my own path. They were there as a reminder to do well and perform well. But, in a big family, you really get to see, like, every kid is unique. And I see that even with having 2 children now. You only have so much influence on your children. They didn't have any ego about the fact that we were each going to choose our own way and have our own successes and failures. They'd be there to support us, but ultimately, you only have so much control as a parent, right? So I never felt pressured to go in any certain direction. I do think that you're probably right. The fact that now I'm at a law school. Had this detour 12 years in legal aid, and that I'm focused on kind of social justice certainly has a lot to do with who I grew up with and who I was surrounded by.
So you mentioned 9 siblings. Where did you fall in that, the age range?
Age range wise, I was in the middle. I am actually the only numbered child, so I'm number 5 in addition to the family. That's where my name comes from, Quinten. So
right, yeah, okay, like 7 of 9, but you're Quinten number 5. Got it.
Right.
Wow. Well, that definitely is a different experience than what I had. I'm an only child, so it would have been nice to have brothers and sisters.
Definitely always had built-in playmates, and sometimes it was great, and sometimes it, I think like any experience.
Yeah. All right, so you're in Ithaca. It is a college town. Your dad is a professor. Your mom is doing these wonderful progressive things and influencing you in that respect. And what was your step from grade school? Like, I saw that you went to, is it Lehman Alternative?
Yeah.
Is that like,
Um, so I went to a small alternative school for middle and high school. We had 250 kids across those 7 grades with a really strong focus on empowering children to be a part of their education. So as it let me have some really interesting experiences. I was always interested in computers. I if you were an 8th grader or above, you were allowed to create a class and teach it. So I did like a little mini class that I taught with computer programming basics as an 8th grader. I had a chance to be, there wasn't a student government per se because we had our school run by direct democracy. You know, every student had a vote in our all school meetings that we had every week. We spent an hour of the week thinking about school governance kind of questions. And that was a really great experience too, a chance to get empowered to have a voice in how our education worked. Got to be a rep in our our school board process. So that's at the like elected legislative level in New York State, but there were student reps and I got to do that for a little while too. So I really do credit that education with exposing me to the fact that as a student, you should have a voice. You could be empowered, that you have a chance to kind of play a leadership role. And the grown-ups in our life gave us a lot of trust to be able to do that. You know, sometimes it was great for them. I think sometimes it was probably terrible for them. My favorite example, maybe, we voted at one point. I think I was actually a big part of this. I don't remember how influential I was, but April Fool's Day is great. Why not have a version of that on the first of every month? So we voted as a school that every first of every month was going to be a day of pranks and joy. That probably was not so fun for the teachers, but they let us do it. And I think it kind of died out after a while anyway. We only had kept interest for so long. But yeah, just that kind of exposure to democracy was very influential.
wow, that's so cool and different because there's so many schools that are kind of like top down control, you know, and to see that you were all, um, you know, empowered to make your own choices and to have a hand in the culture of the school itself is pretty awesome. And you were even teaching back then.
I guess so, in my own like clumsy way.
Wow. And then so after that you go to Carnegie Mellon, right?
That's
And
right.
and your Bachelor of Science degree is in logic and political science, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So the logic part, I mean, I'm a philosophy major, so like
Okay. Yeah.
that's interesting to me. Like, tell me a little bit more about that experience. What it was like. What was it like?
It's just another example of kind of the power of human connections and that influence. So I think I didn't know when I started at Carnegie Mellon what I wanted to do. I had this idea that, hey, maybe I should do computer science. I was always in computers. I did a lot with them. I built some stuff on my own, websites and things like that as a high school student. But I did not get accepted to the Carnegie Mellon School of Computer Science. It was at that point the top program in the world for computer science and very competitive. I think I talked with an admissions person and they was like, hey, what would it take to get in? And they said, literally on the phone to me as a 17-year-old, like, you had to walk on water. So that was a disappointing experience. But then I went there and the closest major in the humanities school was logic and computation. I met the head of the philosophy department, which is where, as you can imagine, logic and computation was housed, and built like a really nice connection. So I think that was what ultimately led me to decide that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stick with that major. And then I added the political science, which was always something I was interested in as well at that point.
And you were pretty involved in student government, right?
I would say that if I had a third major, it would be in student activism as a student at CMU. It wasn't the most politically engaged campus, but I started or participated in like probably a dozen different political organizations during my career there. We had a small group of people that were also really passionate about social justice that we all spent a lot of time together and worked together and did what we could to shake things up.
And I think I saw something that you're working in radio. What was that about?
So one of the groups that I did not start, but I was one of the founding members of, I suppose, was our branch of the Independent Media Center. So that, at the time, it grew out of the battle in Seattle. I guess that's not very far from you in Vancouver. You probably remember this, 1999, the World Trade Organization, giant protest that shut down the city of Seattle. And
Yeah.
I started college not that long after that. Independent media grew out of this idea that those protests were not being treated fairly by the only way you get your word out of it, which was getting into a mainstream newspaper, radio show, TV show. So they built this idea called open publishing. And they're like, we're going to organize this. By not organizing, it's going to be a totally decentralized collective where people in any city could start their own chapter and find their own way to let people get their own news out. What would we do with that today? It would be, well, for a while, the next thing that came along was blogging and then finally social media. But those didn't exist in 1999. People just didn't have those ways of getting their own word out. So I helped start the Pittsburgh branch of Independent Media Center. Or at least I was one of the first members of it, I should say. I really wasn't one of the people who started it. I'd already been doing radio production at that time. It just as a thing you can do in college. That was kind of fun and I enjoyed. But one of the things that we did is we made a small radio news magazine. So focusing mostly on activist issues. Did that for several years. It outlived me, which was great. I think it lasted for about 5 or 6 years in total. And got syndicated on a couple of other local, mostly radio stations. I think ultimately on 7 different stations. That was an important part of my life. I learned about radio, what would work for radio, how to produce a story. It was an interesting and fun experience.
But also community, right? Like bringing people together.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was a chance to hone my tech skills too, I should say, like not just the technical skills to edit a radio show, but also in our Pittsburgh collective, we helped host websites for people around the world that were dealing with, that maybe didn't have the internal capacity to host a website on their own.
Well, I mean, first off, a couple of obvious points, but I love the fact that not only are you dedicated to what you're academically passionate about, but you're also like committed to taking it a step further to make it actionable and doing something in the world that's good with that knowledge. And I'm curious as to how the next step happened about going to law school, because, you know, with the interest that you had, like in systems design and software, like in programming, and then you pursued that through logic and political science, like how that went to the next step of going to law school. Was there advice you got from someone, or was it just like in my case with philosophy degree, I was like, I got to make money somehow. Like, what was your motivation?
We have mostly talked about my interest in the computer side of things, I guess, but that was a thread through my time from 8th grade too. One of the only kind of competitive activities I could do at my tiny school was mock trial. So I kind of got introduced to it. You know, it's just it's a fun role play thing. I don't know if you've ever done mock trial, but honestly, that's what it was. I think we had an actual lawyer come and give us some advice maybe a couple times a month when I was doing that. but it was just led by our history, who herself was not a lawyer. But it's fun to stand up and say objection and act things out. I kept that through high school and my undergrad career too. And again, I got engaged in the competitive part of it. So it was interesting to me in that way. I just kind of enjoyed the performance and the theater and the challenge of making the best argument and seeing if you could win. That was a big part of it that I definitely got exposed to and knew. And then as I was thinking about what my next steps were, that was something my parents hadn't really prepared me for, right? Like my dad didn't have a traditional job. He went from school to teaching in a school. And my mom, I think at that point, was no longer working. That could have been a career path too, but it wasn't something that I was thinking of. It's like, well, what's next? What can I do to make a difference in the world? How can I take these ideas and achieve change at a bigger scale than holding a protest and persuading the people who see that protest? The law was like a really natural place to go. And I didn't see at that point any models of using technology to help people change the world. Like we were doing it on our own scale, like by building these open publishing systems that we called it. But it was, again, on the margins. How do you make big societal change? The best lever that we had that time, for sure, was individual representation or maybe class actions, impact litigation. But it was happening in courts, and that's what I saw.
So it definitely makes sense. It sounds like you by participating in the mock trials and debate, that you were kind of bitten by the bug.
Yeah, that's true.
That. Yeah, but let me ask you this question. It's kind of, it's something you've described, which is that, wanting to do good in the world. And let me just ask you a dumb question, which is why? Like, why does that matter?
Why does it matter?
To you?
Yeah. Why does it matter for me to do? I guess I just want to see if I can make the world be a better place. I mean, I find it meaningful personally to see that people's situation can be improved. I definitely just have that as a core principle. That's where most of my work has been for my whole life, and all the things that I did for fun too. And we're kind of oriented that way, I guess. I guess there's like two other influences I can say, right? So when I was growing up in Ithaca, I mentioned the Back to Land movement. That was part of it, the hippie movement of people who moved to places like Ithaca to kind of have a place of a different way of living than what they had been grown up with in the 50s and 60s. Also, there was another thread, which was like workers. So Dorothy Day and people who followed her, they were big in the social justice movement in Ithaca. People who put themselves on the line to get change. I remember hearing about some of our neighbors, going to Vieques and placing themselves in the path to stop the bombing that happens on that island in Puerto Rico. So I saw those models around me, and I think those were pretty influential to see, like, hey, we're going to make the world a better place. The other thing is, growing up, I've found out this is not true. I've met some of my biological family, and I've done the DNA test. I was told that I was Native American in part genetically for a long time. This is really true. Common for a lot of African American families that they believe that that's part of their ancestry, and it may or may not be true, or maybe the tests aren't that good. I don't know. And then we were not very far from the Iroquois nation where I live. So I remember that idea, right, of like you're thinking ahead for the next 7 generations. It's now been co-opted commercial product. I think you can buy 7th generation products in the store.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not how I learned it. We really did get taught that in elementary school, that idea of you're thinking ahead, not just for what you need, not just for what your children need, but what's it going to be like 7 generations from now? What's the world going to be like? It's hard for me to imagine not thinking in that way, like that long-term planning and how we can improve the world for people.
Well, also, the Iroquois nation was a lot of ideas were kind of co-opted for American democracy as well.
That's probably part of the way we talked about it in school too.
Yeah. All right. So Cornell, graduate cum laude, and also were very, very involved, right, in student government and other activities there. So it seems only natural. I think you had an internship with the Greater Boston Legal Services. Was that straight out of law school, or was that?
Yes, I was the last person who got hired. They had this idea like, hey, we're losing everybody to fellowships and law firms because they find out they're going to get employed in fall of their 3L year. So for a very brief window before the financial crisis, Greater Boston Legal Services had this fellowship program. I got hired in the fall before I graduated or passed the bar, which was amazing, and not the reality for people who want to do a public interest job now, mostly.
And so let's talk about that, because you spent over a dozen years there, and did a lot of great work. And so I'd like to follow the progression of that. Like when you first started there, I mean, what was that like? What kind of position did you have when you started? What was the charge of, the Greater Boston Legal Services? What size were they at the time? Did they grow over time? Like all that stuff.
Yeah, they're fairly similar in size now to what they were when I started, but there was a period of time during the financial crisis when they shrunk dramatically. So I started as an attorney in the housing unit. I stayed there for all 12 years. As I mentioned, I started there in 2008, so pretty soon into my career.
Yeah.
We had the financial crisis. The funding came, a lot of it, from interest on lawyers' accounts. When two things happen, right? Interest rates dropped to zero, and lawyers were no longer holding huge amounts of money in escrow for closing corporate transactions or deals, or even, for paying for someone's house, right? That just wasn't happening. So there was no more funding. We were at risk of involuntary layoffs, but we had this period of time when I was there for less than a year when we started thinking about doing job sharing and voluntary layoffs. So that was kind of a scary time. We were, as a new lawyer, and we're a unionized shop, so it was kind of last in, first out when it comes to layoffs. So what kind of happened kind of fortuitously is that one of the folks who took this voluntary layoff was our IT systems administrator. I had done that as a side job in college. I knew really well how to do that job. So I volunteered, hey, I won't be at risk of layoff. This is a job that the organization needs. I'm going to split part of my time doing systems administration and part of my time learning how to be a lawyer. So it was a really interesting thing, like not that far into my career, to kind of have my job split into those two very different paths.
Wow. So you're both a housing attorney and a systems administrator at the same time.
That's right. Yeah, I wasn't the only person on our IT team, so there were two other folks. So it let me be somewhat flexible about that.
Yeah, so many questions about that. Like, first off, as a housing attorney, I'm sure you have a considerable caseload that you have to manage, right?
Yes. So that was something that changed, obviously, right? So as a person having two jobs, my caseload was reduced.
Okay. How many would you say that you would have to take care of in a month?
Well, what's interesting is that eviction cases actually could take a surprising amount of time. I think our target was like 50 in a year. No, I think the most you could have at a time was 50. I probably had like 10 cases that were at some stage of being worked on, maybe as many as 20 or 30 that were like, hey, yeah, that's open, but there's not really anything happening on it on a month-to-month basis even.
Wow. Yeah. And then juggling that with also helping everyone out with court. Yeah.
I did some different kinds of things too. So we ran group clinics that I would help run, our eviction defense clinics. that was something that I could always do with my attorney hat on. And later on in my time, I helped run our on-site legal services at a shelter in Boston, Rosie's Place. So I did that for several years. And again, so like it was pretty discreet, right? I was limited to the time that I was there. I was helping people when I was there and maybe a bit of follow-up work for them. And I had a smaller number of cases that were in court at that point in my career.
What's one case, maybe it's an unfair question because, it probably has been a while, but like, is there a case that stands out to you as one that you worked on that, I don't know, made a difference for you and the client?
There are a lot of cases that I can remember. I mean, I think one, I'll list a few. Like one was a woman who worked in the school system as a bus driver. Every summer, she would have no income. Every summer, her housing would have some problem, like correctly calculating her rent because she had subsidized rent, even though it was the same thing that happened every year. And she got in trouble before for saying, "Hey, wait a second, your income changed. You should be paying more." And they would often not work out in her favor. And we were really able to help her straighten that out, make sure everything was calculated correctly. Now, the most exciting thing, but that happens to a lot of folks in subsidized housing, just that it's a trap for the unwary, right? Like if you're not careful, even if you think you're doing everything correctly, you can run into trouble because they need to know every penny that you earn, essentially. And sometimes that's unfair if your income is seasonal. I helped a number of clients who were in trouble just because they had too much stuff in their house or they weren't clean enough. And again, it's like, is your landlord going to be intervening in this if it's your own house that you own in the middle of nowhere? No, just because you are in a program where some of your rent is paid, you have automatically more supervision over yourself and can be kind of paternalistic sometimes. But one case that kind of stood out a lot was of a veteran that I helped who had a brain injury, who was being evicted for smoking, although smoking was allowed in his lease. It's a case where he really would have he was unable to change the behavior for more than one reason. Because of his mental limitations, it was very hard for him. It was more likely to engage in kind of impulsive behaviors. So like you can just say like, "Hey, yeah, stop smoking." And smoking is addictive for anybody, regardless of whether you have a brain injury. But I remember that tenant because I think he would have been treated tremendously unfairly, right? I really feel for his neighbors who didn't want to have a tenant next to them who smoked, but this was in a changing part of Boston where people had lived for generations, I think, including his family. And the folks moving in who were complaining were younger, higher income folks that were changing the neighborhood, gentrifying it in their own way in this building. And he had the right to do what he was doing when he entered it, and that's what his lease term said. But he would have been pushed out and been made to leave if we hadn't been able to represent him and help him. Hey, I don't smoke. I guess I'm glad that my neighbor doesn't smoke either. But I think people really need to be treated fairly in that kind of process. So it was a meaningful thing to be able to help him through that.
Absolutely. And, housing, it's not just an abstraction. Like it's something so personal to us, where we live, how we live. And it sounds like in a lot of these situations, you have this external power that's kind of intervening in your life and saying what you can do and what you can't do, even when it says you can do, like you pointed out, and then making an issue of it. It's really a great thing that you're able to help them out.
I will say, like, there's one more family, and I think I can talk about these cases without using identifying details. But there was a family in a longtime immigrant neighborhood of Boston, again, had been there for generations in the same apartment. Her building had been sold multiple times. She lived there with her disabled daughter and her adult son. They had a wonderful family unit. But each time the building sold, the new owner was like, "Hey, I could make more rent in this apartment by kicking out this family that represents the soul of this neighborhood with their disabled daughter," and did not work. We were able to keep her there in her home with her daughter and her son, but it was really interesting. This had happened to her multiple times.
So it sounds like everything that you had in your life was kind of leading towards this because it was bringing together these multiple different experiences you had with love of, computers and logic and thinking things through, yet at the same time, wanting to help people in the world. Um, and then from that, you created Lemma Legal, which was a way for you to have your own company and help people directly. How did you connect with Suffolk Law School? Because that seemed like a perfect match as well.
Yeah. So I will say that I think that I was looking for a way to kind of move beyond the one-on-one service delivery model. So I think I've said, right, like I figured out at one point during the 12 years I was in legal aid, I helped a bit more than 1,000, some of which were very brief service. Some of them were a case that, we prepared it for trial and I had that same client working with me for a year or 2 years even. So 1,000 people, that's great. But at the same time, every year we were turning away thousands of people that qualified for our help because we didn't have enough attorneys to represent them. So I had been exposed to some really interesting, exciting technology products that other people had built. Mark Lordson, who's also a Suffolk adjunct professor, had built some of those tools, some of which we use inside our work just to kind of speed up the work of attorneys. And I was like, yeah, let's take that. Let's do that to try to help some of the people who we're helping now one-on-one. Can't we do that at scale and help them more? So I started by building a tool to help tenants who were being evicted. I kind of think of it as being like a legal clinic in a box. That's the term that I like to use. So all the things that I was doing when I would meet one-on-one or in a clinic setting with a tenant, that might take several hours from start to finish. It's like, how do we make those all accessible in a smartphone friendly format? So someone could do it on their own schedule at their own home, their own pace, and we don't have to screen anybody out. So it's a free tool that's available to anybody. I was really fortunate that I think it actually has something to do with the fact that I was flexible, right? That I had these two different job roles. If I said, hey, this is something I'd like to do to help my own professional development, my supervisors, our leadership at Greater Boston Legal Services, Jackie Bowman, our director, everyone was very open to saying, like, yeah, that's something you just go for it. You can do it. So I spent some spare time for a while working on this tool. Then I ran across a fellow looking for a meaningful role outside of a graduate of Harvard who finished. She had a fellowship year that was funded by our school, Rena Padua. And so it lined up like right when I had this idea. She was like, hey, I'm looking for something to do. And we collaborated for a year to help make that app come to reality. And that's Massachusetts Defense for Eviction, or MADE for short.
Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.